My name is Kylie Hall, and I am the Operations Manager in the NDSU Center for Immunization Research and Education. Today, I'm here to address a common question about COVID-19 vaccines, which is, are fetal cells used to make COVID-19 vaccines? The short answer to this question is that fetal cells are used to manufacture the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine, and fetal cells were used to test the science behind the mRNA vaccines that are produced by both Pfizer and Moderna. For this video, I want to explain how and why fetal cells are used in the development, testing, and manufacturing of vaccines, but also medical products. First, I want to talk about why fetal cells are used in the development and the manufacturing of some vaccines. In order to grow a virus for a vaccine, the virus needs a cell to grow in. Now, there are human viruses that don't grow well in animal cells, and so we need to use human cells to grow the viruses in. We also know that almost all cells will die after they've divided a certain number of times. So because fetal cells have not divided as many times as other cell types, they can be used longer. Fetal cells can also be maintained at low temperatures, which allows scientists to continue using the cell lines for decades. Now, where are the fetal cells from? That's a great question. So there are two cell lines that have been used in the development, testing, and manufacturing of the COVID-19 vaccines. The first one is the HEC293 cell line that was isolated from a fetus in 1973. The other is PER-C6. That cell line was isolated in 1985. These cells were isolated decades ago, and they've continued to grow and divide in labs in petri dishes. And scientists use these cells not only in the development of vaccines, but they also use them for drug development and medical research studies, and they're used around the world. It's important for you to know that for the COVID-19 vaccine development, testing, and manufacturing, no new abortions were solicited or required to make these vaccines. All right, so let's talk a little more specifically about how fetal cells were used for COVID-19 vaccine development, testing, and manufacturing. All right, first and foremost, let's talk about Pfizer and Moderna. So these vaccines do not use fetal cell lines to manufacture their vaccines. These companies did use fetal cell lines, though, in the testing of their vaccines. Essentially, they were trying to determine if a human cell could take up the mRNA from the vaccine and produce the spike protein from SARS-CoV-2. The other testing stage that was used in the testing process was used to characterize the spike protein. So they wanted to look at it once it was produced by that human cell. The use of the fetal cells in the testing of the COVID-19 vaccine is considered very remote from the initial evil of abortion. And the vaccines made by Pfizer and Moderna have been deemed ethically uncontroversial by the pro-life policy organization called the Charlotte Lausier Institute. The following slide here that I'm going to show you has a statement that was released by the Secretariat of Pro-Life Activities, which is a committee within the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And they stated, neither Pfizer nor Moderna used an abortion-derived cell line in the development or production of the vaccine. However, such a cell line was used to test the efficacy of both vaccines. Thus, while neither vaccine is completely free from any use of abortion-derived cell lines, in these two cases, the use is very remote from the initial evil of abortion. One may receive one of the clinically recommended vaccines in good conscience with the assurance that reception of such vaccines does not involve immoral cooperation in abortion. Now I want to talk a little bit about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. To manufacture this vaccine, Johnson & Johnson does require the use of fetal cell cultures. They specifically use the cell line PER-C6. The Catholic Church and the Southern Baptist Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission have both stated that receiving a COVID-19 vaccine that required fetal cell lines for the production or manufacturing is morally acceptable. And then there are two major Islamic scholars councils that have studied this vaccine at great length and have concluded that they are considered halal or lawful. So it's important to note that even though the Johnson & Johnson vaccine does use fetal cells for manufacturing, the vaccines themselves do not contain fetal cells. This is a common claim that circles around the internet. During the manufacturing, what happens is that the cell line is used to grow the adenovirus vector. Once enough virus has been grown in those cell lines, the adenovirus vector is purified out of the fetal cells, and that's what's used to make the vaccine. So the COVID-19 vaccines do not contain any aborted fetal cells. So the US Conference of Catholic Bishops did go further, and they stated that receiving a COVID-19 vaccine ought to be understood as an act of charity towards other members of our community. In this way, being vaccinated safely against COVID-19 should be considered an act of love of our neighbor and part of our moral responsibility for the common good. Given the urgency of this crisis, the lack of available alternative vaccines, and the fact that the connection between an abortion that occurred decades ago and receiving a vaccine produced today is remote, inoculation with the new COVID-19 vaccines in these circumstances can be morally justified. On March 2nd, the same group issued a statement which addressed the use of Johnson & Johnson specifically. And they said, if one can choose among equally safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines, the vaccine with the least connection to abortion-derived cell lines should be chosen. Therefore, if one has the ability to choose a vaccine, Pfizer or Moderna's vaccine should be chosen over Johnson & Johnson's. While we should continue to insist that pharmaceutical companies stop using abortion-derived cell lines, given the worldwide suffering that this pandemic is causing, we affirm again that being vaccinated can be an act of charity that serves the common good. All right, I want to add one more statement in here from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which says, those who, however, for reasons of conscience, refuse vaccine produced with cell lines from aborted fetuses must do their utmost to avoid, by other prophylactic means and appropriate behavior, becoming vehicles for the transmission of the infectious agent. In particular, they must avoid any risk to the health of those who cannot be vaccinated for medical or other reasons and who are the most vulnerable. My understanding of this is if you refuse to be vaccinated for reasons of conscience, you should practice other mitigation strategies to avoid contracting the virus and spreading it to those who may be considered vulnerable. So what other products use fetal cell lines in development, testing, or manufacturing? So to some, hearing that fetal cells are used not only to develop the vaccines, but test or manufacture them, that might be concerning. It might make someone second guess taking a COVID vaccine. But the truth is there are many products that we use every day that use fetal cell cultures for not only development, but testing and manufacturing. So let's talk about what those products are, and there are many. So there are other vaccines that are routinely recommended that use fetal cells. So hepatitis A, chickenpox, rubella, rabies vaccines all fall into that category. There are common over-the-counter medications that you probably recognize on your screen right now. Tylenol, Advil, Sudafed, Tums, Pepto-Bismol, all use fetal cells at some point in their development, testing, or production. There are also common prescription medications that are on this list as well. Even many treatments that have been considered as potential treatments for COVID-19, such as hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, have been tested in fetal cell cultures. And then we can move away, from modern medicine and talk about food additives and cosmetic ingredients as well. The truth is there are many life-saving drugs and many everyday products that have been tested on, produced in, or developed using fetal cell cultures. In the discussion that's currently happening around COVID-19 vaccines, some have gone so far as to reject the vaccine because it has been developed, tested, or manufactured using fetal cell lines, and that is certainly your choice. But I think it's fair to point out that if this is the standard, that the standard should be applied across the board to all drugs, all other vaccines, and many everyday products. And then I'm just going to end with this. While it's certainly honorable to advocate for not using fetal cells in the production of COVID-19 vaccines, we have to remember that this vaccine saves lives. As of early October 2021, COVID-19 has killed nearly 700,000 Americans, nearly 500 of them are children, and over 160 pregnant women have died from COVID-19. This vaccine has saved lives. The Catholic Church has weighed in on this issue, and since vaccines preserve and lengthen life, it is morally permissible to receive vaccines that have even remote connections to abortion. If you'd like more information about this topic, please seek out information from the websites listed on your screen here. And then I will end with a handout on the North Dakota Department of Health website on fetal cells and their use in COVID-19 vaccines. You can search for it on your favorite browser, searching COVID-19 vaccines and fetal cell lines, or visit the website listed on your screen.